I am Miss Lucy Saunders. I'm an art teacher, and this is guidance for AS level art and design. So guidance for Unit 1, the personal creative inquiry. So just to recap the overall A level, there is Unit 1, which is what this video is for guidance of, completed in Year 12 AS. So the PCE, which is 40% of your overall qualification, and is an extended exploratory project or portfolio and outcome or outcomes based on themes and subject matter which are personal and meaningful to you. Then in Year 13, you will complete Unit 2, the PI, personal investigation, and Unit 3, the externally set assignment. So the three together make up the entire A-level. So as I said, this video and this series of videos is guidance for AS. So just to reiterate that again, if you want to read through it again, please pause here. I mentioned this in the previous video, but if you're not watching these in order and you're dipping in and out, I will just do a recap at the beginning of each video to keep you mindful of how this works. So this is my own version of the creative process and how you can flow through that project and address all of the assessment objectives. I've mentioned this in previous videos, but just to be really aware that the exam board do not prescribe a certain way of creating your response to this unit or to any of the units. It is a very creative qualification, and you, as long as you are addressing the assessment objectives, the way in which you do that is up to you and your teacher and your way of working. So the recommendations or suggestions perhaps that I'm giving during these videos are just that, suggestions. You can take some of the things I say and mix them with the work that you've already done or that your teacher has advised you. You could follow along all the way through these and follow this exact structure, or do something completely different. So I'm hoping this will help to guide you, but just keep that in mind. So you start with the initial project ideas, move on to more specific research, which is the phase where this video still is, then starting to try out informed artwork ideas, and then refine and plan towards a final outcome. So the 4 assessment objectives that you need to address are critical understanding, creative making, reflective recording, and personal presentation. And those 4 are not standalone, they feed into each other. There will be overlaps throughout. There will be a piece of work you're doing that addresses 2 or 3, or sometimes even all 4 of the assessment objectives. So they can't really be separated as such within the art project that you are creating. So, as I said, there are 4 videos to this series on AS. Video 1, getting started, theme selection and project planning. Video 2, contextual references and artist studies. Video 3, photography and observational artwork. And video 4, development to final piece. You can work through these in any order. They should work really as individual videos as well. Perhaps you come to these videos towards the end of your project and actually it's just the development to final piece that you would like to look at. That should work fine. So you can follow them in order or you can dip in and out. And please do pause and look in more detail at certain parts if you find those bits more meaningful. Really use this in however way you think will benefit you. So this video is video 2, contextual references and artist studies. And the outcomes we are aiming for are what is a contextual reference and how to include artists into your art project. Again, addressing those assessment objectives. So once you've decided your theme, or perhaps your teacher has given you a theme, depending on what your centre chooses, you should know what your project is going to be about. You will have done some research, or perhaps the research is probably ongoing. And you will have thought of some sources. You need to visit places, you need to interview people, you need to absorb something in real life, a primary source that you can research and then at some point photograph and draw from as well, so that you can put things into context. And you should have started to think about what your context pages might look like. This will need to be fed throughout your project. If it's a sketchbook, for example, there should be references to these ideas throughout your work. It certainly isn't that you do a context page and then the rest of your project doesn't need anything to do with that. it should weave all the way through. But perhaps at the beginning, it might be starting out with a page or a booklet or something that makes that section really clear for you as well. And then the next section is moving on to your artists. So, sorry, just to go back for a moment there, the context might be, for example, a cultural reference. Perhaps you are looking at Welsh heritage and you collect objects that are meaningful to you about being Welsh or perhaps living in Wales, and perhaps it is about the landscape or about the pattern on a Welsh blanket. Maybe your starting point is something to do with location and heritage. Or perhaps it is something historical. Maybe there's a certain time in history that you're particularly interested in, perhaps something to do with the war, and the objects you sort of look at might be medals and uniforms and things like that. So those are certainly just two random examples I thought of as I'm talking, but there will be, or there should be, a contextual point that will bring your ideas to life and allow you to have more depth and meaning. And we're focusing on the example. I'd often use those words, personal and meaningful. So making sure that those things contextually really have significance is really important. So, as I was saying a moment ago, from there, you also need to look at artists. So if you've done the previous video already, we talked a little bit about artist selection. And so if you have chosen who your artists are going to be, you now need to figure out what you're going to learn from them. So it's really important that your artists are informing your work, informing your development as an artist, and informing your practice. So this is one way that you might approach documenting your artist research. You might have a page or a board or a page on your website, however you're deciding to present your work, with a copy of an artist's work or a section, an artwork analysis, which I will go into in a moment, relevant images of the artist's work, relevant information, your own opinion and how it relates to your project, and what you will take forward into your own work, and then an artist response. So you're trying to demonstrate what you've learned from the artist and how this will impact your own artwork. So we are in phase 2 of the specific research section of the creative process. So these are some examples of artist pages that students that I've worked with in the past have created. Now you can see there is a substantial amount of writing on these pages, and that is the main thing that we're going to focus on in this video, writing your artist analysis. Because there's quite a big step up from GCSE to AS, and you now need to be using a much more sophisticated language and developing your ability to record and communicate your ideas and your understanding of the work of others. So just a quick overview on what the artist pages might look like. You will need to show what the artist creates and give some information about them, but showing your visual understanding and demonstrating your use of language is going to be probably the one of the most important aspects of looking at artists' work. Just to touch briefly on, you will also, some teachers might ask you to do an artist copy, some teachers will ask you to do an artist response, but it is important that you engage creatively with your artist's work. If, for example, your artist is a photographer that takes black and white photographs, I'm just looking at one of these examples, you then might respond by taking a photograph of something different, but in a similar setup. So using black and white, for example. If your artist is a pencil drawer and they create really hyper-realistic portraits, again, looking at the examples in front of me, then you might think actually just copying one of their pieces is going to teach me the most that I can learn from looking at this artist. So it is going to be quite a case-by-case basis of what you think is important for you to learn from this artist and what you decide to do as a response. I've had students in the past do things that are much more difficult to directly copy, and then they therefore have gone down the route of responding to the artist. So for example, students that have looked at fashion designers or at filmmakers, if you're copying a pencil portrait, you can try to create it looking exactly the same, depending on your skill level, but it's physically possible. If you're looking at a film artist, for example, who has filmed on the Californian coast and you are working in Wales, it's unlikely you're going to get the exact same shot, unless you're very lucky and going on a really nice holiday. But you can film in a similar style. And actually that is more significant in order to address the assessment objectives, because by filming in a similar style, you would be demonstrating to your teacher and your examiner that you understand the artistic devices that that artist has used, rather than they filmed a beach, so I filmed a beach. Sometimes it's not about the subject, it's about the devices, like I said. So in photography or film, that might be lighting, it might be angles, it might be the movement of the camera, or this sort of height of the shot, or something very significant to that artist. So difficult to pinpoint exactly in a video that is for lots of people rather than for a specific tutorial, but important to talk to your teacher about what specifically for you is the most meaningful way to use an artist's work. As I said, for some people, making a copy is really helpful, but I know that some people steer away from that because you can create a copy and it not necessarily have as much meaning. A couple more examples here of artist pages. So this, for example, it perhaps wasn't possible really for this person to have made an example on the scale that this person, the artist, has made. So they've done a smaller version. This is from the WJC exemplar website. So creating a response, having some visual record of what the artist's work looks like, and then the most significant part, or one of perhaps, is going to be your artist analysis. So that is what we're going to discuss in most depth. So, for example, if you are looking at the artist Kath Riley, who often creates pencil portraits, first thing that I would recommend is finding the artist's website. I also mentioned this in the A-level videos, so if you're watching both, I'm slightly repeating myself, but I think that that is still quite meaningful to listen again, so do bear with me. I think that if you are looking at an artist who, for example, has a wide variety of online images, it could be easy to end up with false images or false information. Whereas if you look directly at their website, you are more likely to know that you are working from a trustworthy source. So, for example, kathriley.com is her own website, so you kind of know that the work there is going to be legitimate. So there's a little screenshot of her website, and then some questions for you. So you could pause the video here in order to sort of quiz yourself and develop your understanding. There's quite a lot of evidence that suggests in order to move things into your long-term memory and really understand a process, you do need to engage with it and do some hard thinking rather than just watching the video. So if this is something that you think that you need to sort of hone or sort of refine your skills, pause here, get a piece of paper or on your computer, however you would like, and answer these questions as best you can before going on to hear what I say about them, because that will really help you to solidify your understanding and move it into the next part of your memory. So have a little go at that if you think that that would be helpful. So why do we look at other artists? Why can't you just create work and not need to reference anyone else? Well, because you are an A-level, an AS level student, and so you are at the beginning of your artistic career, whether you're going to go on to study art at university or whether the skills of your art education are going to enhance you in other ways. You know, you're going into a career that doesn't necessarily isn't necessarily within the creative industries, but these skills will help you massively in whatever career you go into. Either way, you are at the beginning of that understanding, and there are probably thousands, millions, hundreds of thousands of other people who are further along in that journey. So of course we look to others to learn from them, and it also allows us to take on, you know, stand on the shoulders of others and take on other things that others have learned in order to progress. So it's a really important thing to do. It's also in the marking criteria, so you know, in order to access those marks and grades, it's something that's important. So what do I need to know about a piece of artwork before I can write about it? How do I find this out? And what do I not need to know? Where the artist is from. Now, I've looked at this artist's work quite considerably in order to prepare for lessons and for these videos, and I can't remember where Kath Riley's from because it doesn't significantly impact her artwork. Other artists I think of and I know exactly where they're from because it's significant to their work. In another video I've created, I look at an artist called Barbara Walker, who lives in Birmingham in England and specifically creates work about what it is like to live where she lives and experience her life. Very significant to where she lives and to her family. I won't go into too much now, but so I recall immediately where she is from because it is relevant to the work she makes. If it isn't, then we don't need a biography of the artist. You know, telling us where they studied and all of those kinds of things could be interesting, and maybe you do want to put a sentence or two, but there isn't really the language in the marking criteria. There is not really a point where marks will be allocated for knowing that the person has come from a certain country and went to a certain art school or lived in a different country for a amount of time, unless it's impactful to the artwork and you're using that to critically analyze it. Particularly now you are at AS level, this needs to be, you know, a different kind of depth. So think carefully about whether that's important. The media the piece is in, of course, very important. This is a pencil drawing. That might be quite obvious to you. For some of you, it might not be so obvious. It's important to find out. Search it, ask somebody else, have a look, see what you can find out about the artist. It's, you know, that is going to be definitely part of your research. And then thinking about the size. This website, for example, is brilliant because it says there 20 centimeters by 13 centimeters. So the size is there straight away for you. But again, search it up, try to research. The significance of scale can be quite important. If something is huge or if it's small, it's going to have a really different effect on the viewer. And what impact these choices will have on the viewer are sort of what it's all about. So this is what they've done. Why have they chosen to do that? And what does it do? How does it add to the mood? How does it create the feeling or the visual experience that piece of artwork does create? So here is an example of an analysis of this image. Riley's drawing shows a close-up cropped view of a woman's face. The artist uses tonal pencil to create a hyper-realistic portrait, using the smooth build-up of light and dark to emphasize the creases and lines of the skin and contrast this with the soft, doughy texture of her cheeks. This creates the effect that the viewer is very close to the subject. The piece measures 20 centimeters by 13 centimeters, meaning it is larger than a face would be in real life. The impact of these decisions by the artist is a feeling of discomfort. It is as though the woman is under a magnifying glass, under the scrutiny of the viewer. Her gaze looks just past you, not quite meeting your eyes. This is unsettling. Portrayals of women are rarely so exposing. She has a bare, makeupless face and is not smiling. This too is exposing and confronting simultaneously, as there is something unusual about a female in the public eye who is not presented or prepared or packaged for the consumption of her viewer. You would then go on to say, going forward with my project, I plan to, and whatever it is you would take from looking at this artist. So for example, I plan to also work slightly larger than life size in order to create this level of intimacy of the subject looking directly into the eyes of the viewer. So I've talked through what the piece looks like, how it's been created, and what those choices have done. I have sort of extended it on in the last sentence or two and made it as a greater comment about a sort of societal comment, which would be really significant if you were looking at women and the portrayal of women in society, or there being something quite significant about it. So perhaps looking at beauty standards or something like that links that last paragraph, last sentence of the paragraph, sorry. So this is a breakdown of how to put together an artist analysis paragraph. So you can pause here, you could screenshot it or take a photograph so that you can work through this. It is also on the next few slides, so we will talk through it like this. So starting off, what is the subject? What is the subject of the artwork and what is it based on? So for example, at the beginning of this piece, I put Riley's drawing shows a close-up cropped view of a woman's face. So we know it is of a woman's face. You're not going to use everything on each slide, you know, but this just gives you some word, some potential words and some potential sentence starters until you are a bit more confident. This is the beginning of your AS, and as you progress into year 13, you'll probably be more confident with this. But for this stage, going through these slides it can be a really helpful thing to make sure you don't miss anything. So on the section here, it just gives you lots of ideas. You know, objects, is it still life? Is it food and drink? Is it worship, war, working, sleeping? You know, what's happening in the image you're talking about, or the film you're talking about, or the sculpture you're talking about? Is there a subject? If it's an abstract piece, then there won't be. That's significant too. I'll give you an example in a moment. So then you will be looking at the formal elements. So how would you describe the components that make up a particular piece of artwork? Pattern, texture, shape, line, tone, colour, form, harmony, and balance. Your artwork that you are looking at will not address all of these. I have seen examples when students in the past have thought that that's what they needed to do and tried to think of something to say for all 9 on this slide. I would say, would I say never? I think I would say I've never seen a piece of artwork that combines every single thing on this list. You know, the Kath Riley piece shows a great deal of tone and some texture. I would say almost none of the others apply to the Kath Riley piece that we just discussed. So tone being different degrees of light and dark, so the pencil tone that's been used to create that realistic image of the face, and texture because the liney areas of the eyes and then the softer texture of the cheeks that the pencil had created, both really important, plenty to say about them. Pattern, for example, not relevant. So, you know, trust that if you don't have anything to say about it, it probably means it doesn't quite relate to the piece of work you're looking at. So what medium has been used? Is it pencil? Is it paint? Is it photography? Is it glass? I think that's a quite straightforward one. And is there anything significant about the medium? Sorry, for example, with Kath Riley, it was the pencil, the texture of the pencil work that was made it look so realistic and really created that contrast between the soft, sort of fleshier parts of the cheeks and then the linier, more textured eye area. What has the artist attempted with their work and what was the reason behind it? So that's what I tried to do at the end of the Kath Riley sentence, talking a little bit about the representation of women, for example. Be tentative with that because unless you have spoken to the artist, you don't know for sure. So you don't want to say, this is definitely why the artist has done this. But you can say, I think they may have used this to do this. I think it could be suggested that the artist is attempting to challenge ideas of gender, for example, but just be slightly tentative because you're not sure. Unless you read an interview, for example, where you can even directly quote and say, Kath Riley, for example, Kath Riley has been, in an interview I read on reference a newspaper or an online magazine or wherever you've seen it, Kath Riley herself explains that the intention behind this piece was, in which case you can of course be certain because you have the evidence to back it up. And then appropriate. So how will you use the artist's ideas in your own work? How will you appropriate it? So what part are you going to borrow? Is it the materials? Is it the ideas? Is it the concept? Are you going to work in the style of Kath Riley by also taking a photograph quick close up to someone's face and cropping it? And at the very beginning stage, you probably will create a couple of pieces of experimentation that might be quite close to the artist's work. But as you develop through the unit, towards the end, it will obviously become much more your own and you won't be, working too closely to other people's ideas. But at this stage, before you've created any work, you might suggest the things that you would like to replicate or be inspired by. Next slide I've got there is a word bank, so something for you to come back to. You want to be using sophisticated language if you are aiming for a high grade. So as I've mentioned, the formal elements, they're listed there. And then I've just listed a few others that can help you to elevate your language and be quite subject specific, which is what the moderator and your teacher when marking will be looking for. So composition, arrangement, layout, design, geometric, proportion, isometric, perspective, structure, scale, balance, tension, flow, weight, mass, motion. connection, association, representation, signified, created, presented, and certainly that's not an extensive list of words that you can use, just a starting point. So be sure to, try to use sophisticated vocabulary where you can. Okay, so as a task for you to complete to practice these skills, there are 3 pieces of artwork on the last 3 slides of the presentation, and they're all dramatically different. And a task that you could complete if you feel that you'd like to practice these skills is spend some time, choose one of the art pieces, perhaps all 3 if you really want to embed this skill, and start to think about which of the formal elements are relevant and work through that criteria of how to analyse a piece of artwork. So I've deliberately picked 3 that are really quite different so that you should have quite a range of what to write about, and 3 artists that you might know or you might not know at all, so that you will hopefully need to do a little bit of research even if you have heard of them before. So we'll talk about this one briefly together, and then that is a task you can complete after the video in order to practice these skills, going through with the criteria by either skipping back in the video or, as I said, screenshot or take a photograph so that you've got that reference with you. So this is Beatrice Milhazes, a Brazilian artist. Now, if we glance back at the formal elements, we have got line, tone, texture, shape, form, space, pattern, and colour. So the most important for this piece are, of course, going to be pattern and colour. Composition is also going to be particularly interesting because the sort of background images are mostly rectangular and feel quite flat, whereas the pieces that seem to be at the foreground in the closer to the viewer, the top layers, are all much more circular. So there's a contrast between the foreground and the background. So in my notes when I was getting started, I would write down colour, pattern, foreground, background, contrast. Colour is going to be, there's an awful lot you can write about colour. You could think about colour theory. You could discuss there's so much. There's so many different colours going on. And actually there's texture as well. If you look carefully, the sort of off-white square or rectangle seems to have a different kind of texture to it. So already I've got a jumble of ideas of what I could say. So you start off by writing all those things down and then going through. So subject, for example, you would go straight in. You don't need to suggest there's something that there isn't. So I've shown this to younger children before, this piece of artwork or some of this artist's work, and they want to guess and say things are there, like try to make it into a solid thing, an object, to make it a bit easier to talk about. Don't feel that you need to do that. You can go straight in by saying something like Milhazes' piece of art, Milhazes' artwork combines layers of pattern, texture, and colour. Some patterns are suggestive of flowers, although not realistic. There are some patterns that look a little bit like flowers, so you can be that, they're shapes, they're layers of shapes, and that's fine. You don't need to turn it into something else. Okay, so your task is to go through that criteria and see if you can follow that exact same structure and write a paragraph for each of these 3, which would be an excellent piece of practice, ready to then write about the work in your artist analysis for your artist pages. Okay, thank you very much for listening. Remember, there are 4 videos in this series that can help you with your AS, and as I've mentioned a few times, you can dip in and out, and I hope that's been really helpful. Thank you very much.